once we made our declaration, once we've actually determined that we have a right to govern ourselves, we then just need to build our numbers. Now, behind the convention will be the consequences if they do not actually get behind the people. So we're drawing a line in the sand, and the question that some people might ask is whether, in fact, we should bring back the death penalty for treason. And that has been bandied around, but we're not going to. So let's not.
I just wanted to ask how wide a group do you envisage being involved in the development of the Constitution?
It's got to be open to all contributions. We've got to actually invite people to tell us what they think. It's not down to us. It's down to everybody. And I think the point I'm making is that we need to have conventions all over the country so people can literally sort of have a conversation about what we feel we want in the future, because we've got a requirement really is to revisit what it's all about. And I suppose that the doors will be wide open. If the Queen is no longer sovereign, there is a vacancy. So anyone want to be king or queen? Let me continue to go through the letter so you get an idea of exactly what's happening as far as challenging the officialdom, as it were. So chapter 61 of Magna Carta of 1215. Now, one of the things you'll pick up on, people will say that there were other Magna Cartas after 1215. 1215 was the original Magna Carta, and it was the contract with the king and the people. Yeah? So you've got the barons there with the people behind. The barons without the people are nothing. So when people say it was only for the barons, no, it wasn't. It was for the people as well, because the power of the barons resided with the strength of the people. Magna Carta was a restatement of the Charter of Liberties established beforehand, so it's a continuation. So that agreement was, as I say, a contract between the monarch and between the people, and it was before Parliament was even established. So no Parliament can change that contract. Since then, what they've done, and this is a tactic they often use, is they copied Magna Carta and took it into a statute, and since then have revoked the statute. Revoking a statute has no impact on the original Magna Carta. So the Magna Carta is in its entirety is still intact. A lot of it may be irrelevant, but that's neither here nor there. The important bits are in there, and it's the important bits which we're drawing on these days now, which is our right to lawful rebellion if our leaders become crooks, liars, and you know, whatever. All right, so the Magna Carta 1215 is as valid today as it was then. Our members have declared themselves in lawful rebellion, and by so doing we have lawfully removed ourselves from the liability of taxes. That's our right to do so, including council tax, the subject of the bankruptcy order as far as I was concerned. And this, I advise the official to see that this formed part of the judicial review. Now, I may still go down that road of applying for an annulment of the bankruptcy. It's something I haven't decided yet. I'm playing around with the idea. I think it's important that we find out the detail of what the bankruptcy the official receiver is prepared to do. How much he's prepared to ignore it and just, if you like, dig it a bit deeper. That's really the motivation behind going as far as I've gone. All right, so furthermore, we are challenging the legitimacy of government bodies that claim its authority as a consequence of the sovereignty of the reigning monarch, because the sovereignty clearly no longer exists. So we're making that claim that sovereignty no longer exists because they've said so. They've said so themselves. John Major, when Prime Minister, declared in Parliament that Her Majesty had become a citizen of the European Union as a consequence of the signing of the Maastricht Treaty, and thus had become subject to its laws. Thus the Queen has lost her sovereignty. This is an irrefutable fact by definition, and one which is yet to be denied by the government or Her Majesty, despite both having been asked to address the issue. Their silence speaks volumes. And it's straightforward. If you ask somebody a question and they refuse to answer, I think you can make certain assumptions. And we have said that the next stage of that is we will make a declaration, Your Majesty, we are declaring that you're no longer sovereign, and it's up to her to claim otherwise. And I think that's part of the Constitutional Convention. Right? The key point being that as the government's authority stems from the sovereignty of the monarch, which is the embodiment of the people's sovereignty, and that's the key point, Her Majesty's sovereignty is representative of our sovereignty, and that's the important point. It's not the fact that Queen is sovereign, it's the fact that we, the people, are sovereign. The government thus renders itself illegitimate as a consequence of an unlawful act against the people, and in fact is guilty of an act of treason. So our claim is that the government has committed treason against the people, and when there is more of us than there are of them, we'll do something about it. Yeah? As the authority of the government and the office of the official receiver has been brought into question, it is up to them to demonstrate their lawfulness by providing evidence of Her Majesty's sovereignty and thus their legitimacy. So again, what I've said to the official receiver is, I'm challenging your authority, prove it exists. Written confirmation by the government of the supremacy of our Constitution is the first step. With additional confirmation by Her Majesty that she is indeed still sovereign would settle the matter. Both confirmations would of course destroy completely any authority claimed by the European Union. You can't have two masters, so it's either the European Union or it's Her Majesty and the government. It must be taken as self-evident that the government and you are devoid of any legitimacy if these confirmations are not forthcoming. They are, after all, straightforward issues. The government either confirms the supremacy of our Constitution or it does not. Her Majesty is either sovereign or she is not. It is our observation that the government, its officials and the courts refuse to address the issue of Her Majesty's sovereignty or any question in relation to our Constitution, which is proof enough of our assertions. If the government's actions in relation to our Constitution are lawful, they would answer our questions. Their silence gives weight to our position on this matter. And I think it's perfectly clear, isn't it? If we ask a question and they refuse to answer it, through their silence, through acquiescence, they're effectively accepting our points. And this is what we need to do with regards to the constitutional question, is actually put this down as a clear statement of our claim and see if they will challenge that. Our protest by way of withdrawal of our consent to being governed is both lawful and reasonable in the face of a blanket refusal to address these essential issues. We have also written directly to Her Majesty to ask Her Majesty's sovereignty remains intact. To date we've had no reply, and that is the fact that we have written to Her Majesty and she's not replied. It is not beyond the realms of possibility that Her Majesty is under duress, which I've mentioned before. It is, after all, common knowledge that the political establishment have set about imposing unlawful changes upon the House of Parliament, a power grab, such acts being ultra-vires. Both this government and its predecessors have assumed that they govern without constraint, and of course they are constrained by the Constitution, demonstrated by their acts of constitutional reforms outside their remit. For example, the signing of various treaties making the British people subject to foreign control. This is a breach of our constitutional protected rights of self-government. These matters must eventually be tested before a properly constituted common law court or a convention. Ultra-virus is beyond their authority, so they're acting beyond their authority. The Foreign Office has, this is the letter was received by one of our members, the Foreign Office has advised in writing that the Queen's authority has evolved. That means change. Without a full explanation of what this means. We can only assume that they are alluding to the fact that Her Majesty is no longer sovereign, which is of course our contention and the basis on which we have declared ourselves to be in lawful rebellion. Her Majesty's authority cannot be evolved or evolved without approval of the British people, because if her sovereignty evolves or changes, so does ours. And where do they get the right to tell us that we've lost our sovereignty or it's been changed? It is a reasonable assumption to make that the body, i.e. Parliament, that is guilty of treason would deny that treason has occurred, but they cannot give judgment in their own cause. In other words, they can't judge whether they're in treason or not. It has to be done by an independent authority. And a ruling re this matter can only be done by way of a court decision. But as courts derive their authority from the magistrate, who is no longer sovereign, the decision must therefore transfer to a constitutional convention convened by the people. So the point we're making is that if the Queen is no longer sovereign, the courts no longer have authority, then we can't have a judgment by a court because we don't accept their authority. So that's why we're talking about constitutional convention. The only people that can now resolve this are the people. So the conversation that we're having, the conversation that you guys are going to have out there, is the Queen is no longer sovereign. What are we going to do about it? Such a convention is in the pipelines, and as I mentioned, I think we're now talking about September. Right, let's move on. Other relevant points, and this is just filling in the details. Again, this letter is designed to inform the official receiver to see what his response will be. In 1972, Edward Heath committed treason by signing the European Communities Act. Documents revealed under the 30-year rule demonstrate that he knew at the time that the European Community Act was unlawful because it was in contravention of our Constitution. He had advice that it was unlawful and it would lead to the transfer of national sovereignty. And he knew that. Now, we suspect that Edward Heath, we know he was a homosexual. That's not a problem.
He's also a straightener.
Probably, and again, I don't know any proof. And we suspect also he's a paedophile. Okay, so we believe he's
supposed to be a communist as well. We may as well throw that one.
Well, and again, the conversation you're going to have out there, you try and remain credible to people who are not people of this, because if you lose the drift, you're going to lose people. So stick to the basics. That Edward Heath is evidence, absolute evidence under the 30-year rule that Edward Heath knew that the transfer of our sovereignty was unlawful. Okay, that's the point that we're trying to get across there.
Well, he thought it'd all be over before the 30-year rule came and he wouldn't get caught out, didn't he?
Well, exactly. He knew he'd been bombed. Right. All governments are constrained by our Constitution. This is another point that you need. If anybody asks the questions whether governments actually have absolute power, no, they do not. They are constrained. The reason that we know that, of course, is the government got into power and made statutes. They could make a statute that said we're going to be in power for all time. And that's what Hitler did, of course. That was
the Enabling Act.
The Enabling Act. And we do have an Enabling Act in this country brought in by Tony Blair. And that's designed to seize power from the people and literally to keep us under thumb by declaring martial law.
Now, why would they want to do that?
Because I think they're getting a bit nervous. So no statute can breach our Constitution, and all governments are constrained by the Constitution. Every Western democratic government accepts the doctrine of government by consent, and I don't think they would ever deny that they govern by dictatorship. So it's a very important issue that if you are in court, it's a good one to drop on the judge. Are we governed by consent? Yes, we are. We will never be. Do the governments make statutes? Yes, they do. Do the courts impose the statutes or rule on statutes? Yes. Therefore, the courts must be with our consent also. So when you are in a court of law, you are there with your consent, and if you withhold your consent, you're entitled to do so. So when the judge says, you do as I say, you can say, excuse me, do you, sir, claim any authority over me without my consent? A good question to ask. Remember that one. Consent, the most powerful word in the English dictionary as far as I'm concerned. Well, they do. They threaten. That again is that they use the fear. That they're constantly using the fear to oppress them. Yeah, and we have to respond to it. So, and it's all about picking the right time and the right place also. This is coming to point 2 now, because I mentioned 4 points as far as the official receiver is concerned, and point 2 was that the authority of the official receiver stems only from legitimate government, and this is currently null and void. So I challenge the authority of the official receiver and, if you like, call him to sort of claim why he's got authority over me. It is my contention that the authority of the official receiver currently has no validity because the Queen is no longer sovereign, and there is no evidence that consent has been given for you to act on this bankruptcy matter.